Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we're diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It is not the format for everyone, but some people seem to find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, let us dive in and continue our exploration of the secret doctrine with the moon, Deus Lunus, Phoebe. This archaic symbol is the most poetical of all symbols, as also the most philosophical. The ancient Greeks brought it into prominence, and the modern poets have worn it threadbare. The queen of the night, riding in the majesty of her peerless light in heaven, throwing all, even Hesperos, into darkness, and spreading her silver mantle over the whole sidereal world, has ever been a favorite theme with all the poets of Christendom, from Milton and Shakespeare down to the latest versifier. But the refulgent lamp of night, with her suite of stars unnumbered, spoke only to the imagination of the profane. Until lately, religion and science had naught to do with the beautiful mythos, yet the cold, chaste moon, she, in the words of Shelley, who makes all beautiful on which she smiles, that wandering shrine of soft yet icy flame, which ever is transformed yet still the same, and warms but not illumes, stands in closer relation to earth than any other sidereal orb. The sun is the giver of life to the whole planetary system. The moon is the giver of life to our globe, and the early races understood and knew it, even in their infancy. She is the queen, and she is the king, and was King Soma before she became transformed into Phoebe and the chaste Diana. She is preeminently the deity of the Christians, through the Mosaic and Kabbalistic Jews, though the civilized world may have remained ignorant of the fact for long ages. In fact, ever since the last initiated father of the church died, carrying with him into his grave the secrets of the pagan temples. For the fathers, such as Origen or Clemens Alexandrinus, the moon was Jehovah's living symbol, the giver of life and the giver of death, the disposer of being in our world. For, if Artemis was Luna in heaven, and, with the Greeks, Diana on earth, who presided over childbirth and life, with the Egyptians, she was Hecate in hell, the goddess of death, who ruled over magic and enchantments. More than this, as the personified moon, whose phenomena are triadic, Diana Hecate Luna is the 3-in-1, for she is Diva Transformis, Tergemina Triceps, 3 heads on 1 neck. Let us check out the footnote. The goddess Trimorphos in the statuary of Alcamenes, 3 heads on 1 neck, like Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. Hence, she is the prototype of our Trinity, which has not always been entirely male. The number 7, so prominent in the Bible, so sacred in its 7th Sabbath day, came to the Jews from antiquity, deriving its origin from the fourfold number 7 contained in the 28 days of the lunar month, each septenary position thereof being typified by 1/4 of the moon. It is worth the trouble of presenting in this work a bird's-eye view of the origin and development of the lunar myth and worship in historical antiquity on our side of the globe. Its earlier origin is untraceable by exact science, rejecting as it does tradition, while for theology, which, under the guidance of the crafty popes, has put a brand on every fragment of literature that does not bear the imprimatur of the Church of Rome, its archaic history is a sealed book. Whether the Egyptian or the Aryan Hindu religious philosophy is the more ancient, and the secret doctrine says it is the latter, does not much matter in this instance, or in any instance, as the lunar and solar worship are the most ancient in the world. Both have survived and prevailed to this day throughout the whole world, with some openly, with others, e.g. in Christian symbolics, secretly. The cat, a lunar symbol, was sacred to Isis, herself the moon in one sense, as Osiris was the sun. The cat is often seen on top of the sistrum in the hands of the goddess. This animal was held in great veneration in the city of Bubaste, which went into deep mourning after the death of every sacred cat, because Isis, as the moon, was particularly worshipped in this city of mysteries. The astronomical symbolism connected with it has already been given in Section 1 of Symbolism, and no one has better described it than Mr. G. Massey in his lectures and in The Natural Genesis. The eye of the cat, it is said, seems to follow the lunar phases in its growth and decline, and its orbs shine like two stars in the darkness of light. What? How does the eyes of a cat follow the lunar phases of the moon? It absolutely does not. The cat's eyes do not change according to the day of the month. Hence the mythological allegory which shows Diana hiding under the shape of a cat in the moon, when, in company with other deities, she was seeking to escape the pursuit of Typhon. Vide the Metamorphoses of Ovid. The moon in Egypt was both the eye of Horus and the eye of Osiris, the sun. Some of this is not, I'm not stopping it because it's mostly history, right? It's mostly opinion. There's no reason to venerate the moon over any other solar orbit. It's closer, we get better detail, and you can actually look at it, so it's different from the sun, but other than that, it does affect the tides, it does affect our moods and our emotions, so it's understandable that there's going to be a little bit there, right? But the moon is not a god, right? This is all allegory, and that's perfectly fine. But how does the moon in Egypt be both the eye of Horus and the eye of Osiris, which is the sun? That's not a possibility, right? The moon reflects the sun's light, sure, whatever, but it cannot be the eye of Horus and the eye of Osiris. If one is meant to be the moon and one is meant to be the sun, it cannot be both, and that's annoying to me, right? This whole cat thing being associated with the moon, whatever, cats are nocturnal for the most part, fine. Probably would have been better to be an owl or something of that nature with the reflection or whatever, but it's whatever. It doesn't even matter. If you are worshiping a cat, you are doing shit wrong. If you are worshiping the moon, you are still doing shit wrong. It doesn't mean that there's not some significance involved with the things. It doesn't mean that symbology is necessarily a bad thing. But if you are giving your worship to anything that you can see, you're doing it wrong. All the way, fully, 100%. It doesn't matter how long somebody's been doing it. Right? If you are worshiping a cat, it doesn't matter that the ancient Egyptians did it. You're still wrong as much as they were wrong. Right? It's perfectly understandable why they would worship it. It is not understandable why you would. Right? Cats back in the day, they kept us alive. They killed off the vermin and the rodents that were trying to eat our food that we had stored. That is why we like cats so much. Right? They are fun to have around, to play with, and they're cute when they're doing things. That is an evolutionary tactic to trick us into keeping them around, and it worked. It's fine. I've got a cat. I don't worship the cat. You should not worship the cat either. If you are going to give your worship to something, it should be fairly clearly defined, however, right? If you are going to worship the eye of Horus, and that is the sun, then that's the sun, all right? Or the eye of Osiris. If that is the sun, that is the sun. Because it appears that the moon was both the eye of Horus and the eye of Osiris. The sun is fucking stupid. It doesn't make any goddamn sense. None. And it's fucking stupid. It can be one or the other. It can, both of them can represent the moon. That's perfectly fine. But it cannot represent both the moon and the sun. No, fuck you. The same with the cynocephalus. The dog-headed ape was a glyph to symbolize the sun and moon in turn. Though the cynocephalus was is a more hermetic than a religious symbol, for it is the hieroglyph of Mercury, the planet. And so, of course, if it's a symbol of Mercury, the planet, of course it's going to be taken for the sun and the moon. For it is the hieroglyph of Mercury, the planet, as of the Mercury of the alchemical philosophers. As, say the alchemists, Mercury has to be ever near Isis as her minister, as without Mercury neither Isis nor Osiris can accomplish anything in the great work. Cynocephalus, whenever represented with the caduceus, the crescent, or the lotus, is a glyph of the philosophical Mercury. But when seen with a reed, a roll of parchment, he stands for Hermes, the secretary and advisor of Isis, as Hanuman filled the same office with Rama. Though the regular sun worshippers, the Parsis, are few, yet not only is the bulk of the Hindu mythology and history based upon and interblended with these two worships, but so is also the Christian religion itself. From their origin down to our modern day, it has colored the theologies of both the Roman Catholic and Protestant churches. The difference, indeed, between the Aryan Hindu and the Aryan European faiths is very small, if only the fundamental ideas of both are taken into consideration. Hindus are proud of calling themselves Suryas and Chandravansas of the solar and lunar dynasties. The Christians pretend to regard it as idolatry, and yet they adhere to a religion entirely based upon these solar and lunar worships. It is useless and vain for the Protestants to exclaim against the Roman Catholics for their Mariolatry, based on the ancient cult of the lunar goddesses, when they themselves worship Jehovah, preeminently a lunar god, and when both churches have accepted in their theologies the Son, Christ, and the lunar Trinity. What is well known of Chaldean moon worship of the Babylonian god Sin, called by the Greeks Deus Lunus, is very little, and that little is apt to mislead the profane students who fail to grasp the esoteric significance of the symbols. As popularly known to the ancient profane philosophers and writers, for those who were initiated were pledged to silence, the Chaldea were the worshippers of the moon under her and his various names, just as were the Jews who came after them. In the unpublished manuscripts on the art speech already mentioned, giving a key to the formation of the ancient symbolical languages, a logical raison d'etre is brought forward for this double worship. It is written by a wonderfully well-informed and acute scholar and mystic, who gives it in the comprehensive form of a hypothesis. The latter, however, becomes forcibly a proven fact in the history of religious evolution in human thought to anyone who has ever had a glimpse of the secret of ancient symbology. Thus, he says, one of the first occupations among men, connected with those of actual necessity, would be the perception of time periods. Footnote. Ancient mythology includes ancient astronomy as well as astrology. The planets were the hands pointing out on the dial of our solar system the hours of certain periodical events. Thus, Mercury was the messenger appointed to keep time during the daily solar and lunar phenomena, and was otherwise connected with the god and goddess of light. Would be the perception of time periods marked on the vaulted arc of the heavens sprung and rising over the level floor of the horizon or the plain of still water. These would come to be marked as those of day and night, of the phases of the moon, of its stellar or synodic revolutions, and of the period of the solar year with recurrence of the seasons, and with the application to such periods of the natural measure of day or night, or of the day divided into the light and the dark. It would also be discovered that there was a longest and shortest solar day, and 2 solar days of equal day and night within the period of the solar year, and the points in the year of these could be marked with the greatest precision in the starry groups of the heavens or the constellations, subject to that retrograde movement thereof, which in time would require a correction by intercalation, as was the case in the description of the flood, where correction of 150 days was made for a period of 600 years, during which confusion of landmarks had increased. This would naturally come to pass with all races in all time, and such knowledge must be taken to have been inherent in the human race prior to what we call the historic period. It is important to note that there is significant reason to believe that once upon a time we did not have 365 days in the year. It is most likely during that time period when the sun stood still that our calendars changed, and it changed across the globe. Everybody went to a new system of counting the days after that particular period. It is recorded that the sun stood still, right? That this thing actually happened. I believe that the Jews just took that for themselves like they did everything else. But this event was recorded by Chinese scholars separately. It was recorded by other scholars scattered across the globe separately, that there was a extended day. What most likely happened was a change in the rotation of the earth, and we went from a 8-day week into a 7-day week. And so it is not a proven fact, but there is significant reason to believe that this period where this correction had to be made was because of that, because we had got off track thinking that we still had the 360-day year, when in fact we went to a 365 one. And again, that is not proven, that is speculation, but there is reasons to believe that. On this basis, the author seeks for some natural physical function possessed in common by the human race and connected with the periodical manifestations, such that the connection between the 2 kinds of phenomena became fixed in popular usage. He finds it, A, in the feminine physiological phenomena every lunar month of 28 days, or 4 weeks of 7 days each, so that 13 occurrences of the period should happen in 364 days, which is the solar week year of 52 weeks of 7 days each. The quickening of the fetus is marked by a period of 126 days, or 18 weeks of 7 days each. That period, which is called the period of viability, is one of 210 days, or 30 weeks of 7 days each. The period of parturition is accomplished in 280 days, or a period of 40 weeks of 7 days each, or 10 lunar months of 28 days each, or of a 9 calendar months of 31 days each, counting on the royal arc of the heavens for the measure of the period of traverse from the darkness of the womb to the light and glory of conscious existence, that continuing inscrutable mystery and miracle. Thus, the observed periods of time marking the workings of the birth function would naturally become a basis of astronomical calculation. We may almost affirm that this was the mode of reckoning among all nations, either independently or intermediately, and indirectly by tuition. It was the mode with the Hebrews, for even today they calculate the calendar by means of the 354 and 355 of the lunar year, and we possess a special evidence that it was the mode with the ancient Egyptians, as to which this is the proof. The basic idea underlying the religious philosophy of the Hebrews was that God contained all things within himself. Footnote. A caricatured and dwarfed Vedanta notion of Parabrahman containing within itself the whole universe as being that boundless universe itself, and there existing nothing outside of itself. And that man was his image, man including woman. The place of the man and the woman with the Hebrews was among the Egyptians, occupied by the bull and the cow, sacred to Osiris and Isis. Footnote 2. Just as they are to this day in India, the bull of Siva and the cow representing several Sakti goddesses. Osiris and Isis, who were represented respectively by a man having a bull's head and a woman having the head of a cow, which symbols were worshipped. Notoriously, Osiris was the sun and the river Nile, the tropical year of 365 days, which number is the value of the word Nilos, and the bull, as he was also the principle of fire and of life-giving force, while Isis was the moon, the bed of the river Nile, or the mother earth, for the parturient energies of which water was a necessity, the lunar year of 354 to 364 days, the time maker of the periods of gestation, and the cow marked by or with the crescent new moon. But the use of the cow of the Egyptians for the women of the Hebrews was not intended as of any radical difference of signification, but a concurrence in the teaching intended, and merely as a substitution of a symbol of common import, which was this, vis-a-vis, the period of parturition, which with the cow and the woman was held to be the same, or 280 days, or 10 lunar months of 4 weeks each. And in this period consisted the essential value of this animal symbol, whose mark was that of the crescent moon. Footnote 3. Hence the worship of the moon by the Hebrews. These parturient and natural periods are found to have been subjects of symbolism all over the world. They were thus used by the Hindus, and are found to be most plainly set forth by the ancient Americans in the Richardson and Guest tablets, in the Palenque crossed, and manifestly lay at the base of the formation of the calendar forms of the Mayas of Yucatan, the Hindus, the Assyrians, and the ancient Babylonians, as well as the Egyptians and Old Hebrews. The natural symbols would be either the phallus, or the phallus and the yoni, or male and female. Indeed, the words translated by the generalizing terms male and female in the 27th verse of the first chapter of Genesis are sakr and nakabra, or literally phallus and yoni. Footnote 4. Male and female he created them. That is one of the two accounts. Phallus and yoni, while the representation of the phallic emblems would barely indicate the genital members of the human body, when their functions and the development of the seed vesicles emanating from them was considered, then would come into indication a mode of measures of lunar time, and, through lunar, of solar time. This is the physiological or anthropological key to the moon symbol. The key that opens the mystery of theogony, or the evolution of the Manvanteric gods, is more complicated and has nothing phallic in it. All is mystical and divine there. But the Jews, being connected beyond connecting Jehovah directly with the moon as a generative god, preferred to ignore the higher hierarchies and have made some of them, zodiacal constellations and planetary gods, their patriarchs, thus ehumerizing the purely theosophical ideas and dragging it down to the level of sinful humanity. See section Holy of Holies in the Symbolism of Book 2. The manuscript from which the above is extracted explains very clearly to what hierarchy of gods Jehovah belonged, and who this Jewish God was. For it shows in clear language that which the writer has always insisted upon, namely, that the God with which the Christians have burdened themselves was no better than the lunar symbol of the reproductive or generative faculty in nature. They have ever ignored even the Hebrew secret god of the Kabbalist, Ein Sof, as grand as Parabrahman in the earliest Kabbalistic and mystical conceptions. But it is not the Kabbalah of Rosenroth that can ever give the true original teachings of Simeon ben Ioke as metaphysical and philosophical as any. And how many are there among the students of the Kabbalah who knew anything of them except in their distorted Latin translations? Let us glance at the idea which led the ancient Jews to adopt a substitute for the ever unknowable, and which has misled the Christians into mistaking the substitute for the reality. If to these organs, phallus and yoni, as symbols of creative cosmic agencies, the idea of time periods can be attached, then, indeed, in the construction of temples as dwellings of deity, or of Jehovah, that post, designated as the Holy of Holies or the Most High Place, should borrow its title from the recognized sacredness of the generative organs, considered as symbols of measures as well as of creative cause. With the ancient wise, there was no name and no idea and no symbol of a first cause. Footnote. Because it was too sacred, it is referred to as that in the Vedas. It is the eternal cause and cannot therefore be spoken of as a first cause, a term implying the absence of any cause at one time. The first cause, the God who created all things, is beyond the appellation of a name, right? It doesn't matter what name you give him. It doesn't matter what name I give him. It's not the name that was originally his, right? And by him and his, that is, using the common vernacular, God is beyond the concepts of male and female. He contains both masculine and feminine, positive and negative, destructive and creative, all carried within the same being. If you're putting a name on it, you're already doing it wrong. And we can do it, right? We can attribute a name to the idea so that we can give the idea to other people. But that name should not be held as holy. It should be merely a placeholder. It can be first cause on so for whatever you happen to give it. But it is beyond the concept of a name, right? Any name that you give is automatically going to be wrong. Any sex that you assign is automatically going to be wrong. If you can put your eyes upon it, you are already worshiping the wrong thing. Right? God is literally all things at the same time. So if you are taking one particular thing, person, place, or item, and worshiping that as though it is God, you are already doing it wrong. Right? God is beyond any signals, any significance. Right? Well, significance is probably the wrong word, but it's beyond any representative in a true fashion. You can assign a representative to it, but that doesn't make it correct. With the Hebrews, the indirect conception of such was couched in a term of negation of comprehension, vis-a-vis Ein Sof, or the without bounds. But the symbol of its first comprehensible manifestation was the conception of a circle with its diameter line, see the proem of Book 1, Part 1, to carry at once a geometric, phallic, and astronomic idea, for the one takes its birth from the naught of the circle, without which it could not be, and from one, or primal one, spring the 9 digits, and geometrically all plane shapes. So, in the Kabbalah, this circle with its diameter line is the picture of the 10 Sephiroth, or emanations, composing the Adam Kadmon, the archetypal man, the creative origin of all things. This idea of connecting the circle and its diameter line, that is, number 10, with the significance of the reproductive organs and the most holy place, was carried out constructively in the king's chamber, or Holy of Holies, of the Great Pyramid, in the tabernacle of Moses, and in the Holy of Holies of the Temple of Solomon. It is the picture of a double womb, For in Hebrew, the letter pi is at the same time the number 5 and the symbol of the womb, and twice 5 is 10, or the phallic number. This double womb also shows the duality of the idea carried from the highest, spiritual, down to the lowest or terrestrial plane, and by the Jews limited to the latter. With them, therefore, the number 7 has acquired the most prominent place in their exoteric religion, a cult of external forms and empty rituals, as their Sabbath, for instance, the seventh day sacred to their deity, the moon, symbolical of the generative Jehovah, while with other nations the number 7 was typical of theogonic evolution, of cycles, cosmic planes, and the 7 forces and occult powers in cosmos as a boundless whole, whose first upper triangle was unreachable to the finite intellect of man. While other nations, therefore, busied themselves in their forcible limitation of cosmos in space and time, only with its septenary manifested plane, the Jews centered this member solely in the moon, and based all their sacred calculations thereupon. Hence, we find the thoughtful author of the manuscript just quoted remarking, in reference to the metrology of the Jews, that if 20,612 be multiplied by 4/3, the product will afford a base for the ascertainment of the mean revolution of the moon. And if this product be again multiplied by 4/3, this continued product will afford a base for finding the exact period of the mean solar year. This form becoming for the finding of astronomical periods of time of very great service. This double number, male and female, is symbolized also in some well-known idols, e.g. Ardhanari Iswara of the Isis of the Hindus, Eridanus or Ardan of the Hebrew Jordan, or source of descent. She is standing on a lotus leaf flowing in the water, but the signification is that it is androgyne or hermaphrodite, that is, phallus and yoni combined, the number 10, the Hebrew letter yod, the containment of Jehovah. She, or rather he, gives the minutes of the same circle of 360 degrees. Jehovah, in its best aspect, is Bina, the upper mediating mother, the great sea or Holy Spirit, therefore rather a synonym of Mary, the mother of Jesus, than of his father. That mother being the Latin mare. The sea is here also Venus, the Stella del Mare, or star of the sea. The ancestors of the mysterious Akkadians, the Kandra or Indovances, the lunar kings whom tradition shows reigning at Prayag, Allahabad, ages before our era, had come from India and brought with them the worship of their forefathers, of Soma and his son Buddha, which afterwards became that of the Chaldeans. Yet such adoration, apart from popular astrology or heliolatry, was in no sense idolatry, no more, at any rate, than the modern Catholic symbolism which connects their Virgin Mary, the Magna Mater, of the Syrians and Greeks, with the moon. Of this worship the most pious Roman Catholics felt quite proud and loudly confessed to it. In a memoir to the French Academy, the Marquis de Mireville says, "It is only natural that, as an unconscious prophecy, Amun-Ra should be his mother's husband, since the Magna Mater of the Christians is precisely the spouse of that son she conceives. We, Christians, can understand now why Neithus shows radiance on the sun while remaining the moon, since the Virgin, who is the Queen of Heaven, as Neith was, clothes herself in her radiance, and clothes, in his turn, the Christ Son. Tu vestes solem et te sol vestit is sung by the Roman Catholics during their service, and he adds, we, Christians, understand also how it is that the famous inscription at Sais should have stated that none has ever lifted my peplum veil, considering that this sentence, literally translated, is the summary of what is sung in the church on the day of the Immaculate Conception. Surely, nothing could be more sincere than this. It justifies entirely what Mr. Gerald Massey has said in his lecture on Luniolatry, Ancient and Modern. The man in the moon, Osiris Sut, Jehovah Satan, Christ Justus, and other lunar twins, is often charged with bad conduct. In the lunar phenomenon, the moon was one, as the moon, which was twofold in sex and threefold in character, as mother, child, and adult male. Thus, the child of the moon became the consort of his own mother. It could not be helped if there was to be any reproduction. He was compelled to be his own father. These relationships were repudiated by later sociology, and the primitive man in the moon got tabooed. Yet, in its latest, most inexplicable phase, this has become the central doctrine of the grossest superstition the world has seen, for these lunar phenomena and their humanly represented relationships, the incestuous included, are the very foundations of the Christian Trinity and unity. I disagree. Right, that may very well be what the Christians intend by the Trinity, but it is not what I do, right? For me, the Trinity is the body, the soul, and the spirit. And so, there is no need for any incest, right? Just saying. Through ignorance of the symbolism, the simple representation of early time has become the most profound religious mystery in modern luniolatry. The Roman Church, without being in any wise ashamed of the proof, portrays the Virgin Mary, arrayed with the sun, and the horned moon at her feet, holding the lunar infant in her arms, as child and consort of the Mother Moon. The mother, child, and adult male are fundamental. In this way it can be proved that our Christology is mummified mythology and legendary lore, which have been palmed off upon us in the Old Testament and the New as divine revelation uttered by the very voice of God. A charming allegory is found in the Zohar, one which unveils better than anything ever did the true character of Jehovah or Yehovah in the primitive conception of the Hebrew Kabbalist. It is now found in the philosophy of Ibn Gabriel's Kabbalah, translated by Isaac Meyer. In the introduction written by Rehezkiah, which is very old, says our author, and forms part of our Brody edition of the Zohar, is an account of a journey taken by Ar Eleazar, son of Ar Shimon Bioa, and Rabbi Abba. They met a man with a heavy burden and asked his name, but he refused to give it and proceeded to explain to them Torah law. They asked, "Who caused thee thus to walk and carry such a heavy load?" He answered, "The letter Yod, which, 10, is the symbolical letter of Kether and the essence and germ of the holy name, YHVH, Yahweh. Yahweh." They said to him, "If thou wilt tell us the name of thy father, we will kiss the dust of thy feet." He replied, "As to my father, he had his dwelling in the great sea, and was a fish therein, like Vishnu and Dagon or Oannes, which first destroyed the great sea. And he was great and mighty and ancient of days, until he swallowed all the other fishes in the great sea." Or Eleazar listened to him and said, "Thou art the son of the holy flame, thou art the son of Rabham. Nun Asabah, the old, the fish in Aramaic or Chaldee, is Nun. Thou art the son of the light of the Torah, Dharma, etc." Then the author explains that the feminine Sephiroth, Bina, is termed by the Kabbalists the Great Sea. Therefore, Bina, whose divine names are Jehovah, Yah, and Elohim, is simply the Chaldean Tiamat, the female power, the Talahata of Berosus, who presides over the chaos, and was made out later by Christian theology to be the serpent and the devil. She, Yahuwah, is the supernal He and Ev. This Yahuwah, then, or Jehovah, is identical with our chaos, father, mother, son, on the material plane and in the purely physical world. Demon and Deus at one and the same time, the sun and moon, good and evil, God and demon. Lunar magnetism generates life, preserves and destroys it, cyclically as well as physically. And if, astronomically, she is one of the 7 planets of the ancient world in theogony, she is one of the regents thereof, with Christians now as much as with pagans, the former referring to her under the name of one of their archangels, and the latter under that of one of their gods. Therefore, the meaning of the fairy tale, translated by Quolson from an old Chaldean manuscript, translated into Arabic, about Kutami being instructed by the idol of the moon, is easily understood. Celtinus tells us the secret as well as Maimonides. The worshippers of the Teraphim, the Jewish oracles, carved images and claimed that the light of the principal stars, planets, permeating these through and through, the angelic virtues, or the regions of the stars and planets, conversed with them, teaching them many most useful things and arts. And Celtinus explains that the Teraphim were built and composed after the position of certain planets, those which the Greeks called Stoichia, and according to figures that were located in the sky and called Alexteroi, or the tutelary gods. Those who traced out the Stoichia were called the Stoichiamatoikoi, or the diviners by the Stoichia. De Diris Siris, Teraph 2. Vide Infra de Teraphim. It is such sentences, however, in the Nabatean agriculture that have frightened the men of science and made them proclaim the work either an apocrypha or a fairy tale unworthy of the notice of the Academician. At the same time, as shown, zealous Roman Catholics and Protestants tore it metaphorically to pieces, the former because it described the worship of demons, the latter because it is ungodly. They are all wrong, once more. It is not a fairy tale, and as far as regards pious churchmen, the same worship may be shown in the Scriptures, however disfigured by the translation. Solar and lunar worship, as well as that of the stars and elements, are traced and figure in the Christian theology. Defended by papists, they are stoutly denied by the Protestants only at their own risk and peril. 2 instances may be given. Ammianus Marcellinus teaches that ancient divinations were always accomplished with the help of the spirits of the elements, spiritus elementorium, and in Greek, pneumata ton stoichion. But it is found now that the planets, the elements, and the zodiac were figured not only in Heliopolis by the 12 stones called Mysteries of the Elements, Elementorium Arcana, but also in Solomon's Temple, and, as pointed out by various writers, in several of the old Italian churches, and even at Notre Dame in Paris, where they can be seen to this day. No symbol, the sun included, was more complex in its manifold meanings than the lunar symbol. The sex was, of course, dual. With some it was male, e.g. the Hindu King Soma and the Chaldean Sin. With other nations it was female, the beauteous goddesses Diana Luna, Ilithia, Lucina. In Taurus, human victims were sacrificed to Artemis, a form of the lunar goddess. The Cretans called her Dictyana, and the Medes, and Persians, Aniatis, as shown by an inscription of Collio. Artemisia Aniati. But we are now concerned chiefly with the most chaste and pure of the virgin goddesses, Luna Artemis, to whom Pamphos was the first to give the surname of Callistia, and of whom Hippolytus wrote Callistia Porlu Parthenon. This Artemis Locaia, the goddess that presided at conception and childbirth, Iliad Pausanias, is in her functions, and as the triple Hecate, the Orphic deity, the predecessor of the god of the rabbins and pre-Christian Kabbalists, and his lunar type. The goddess Trimorphos was the personified symbol of the various and successive aspects represented by the moon in each of her three phases, and this interpretation was already that of the Stoics, while the Orpheans explained the epithet Trimorphos by the three kingdoms of nature over which she reigned: jealous, bloodthirsty, revengeful, and exacting. Hecate Luna is a worthy counterpart of the jealous god of the Hebrew prophets. The whole riddle of this solar and lunar worship, as now traced in the churches, hangs, indeed, on this world-old mystery of lunar phenomena. The correlative forces in the Queen of the Night that lie latent for modern science but are fully active to the knowledge of Eastern adepts explain well the 1,001 images under which the moon was represented by the ancients. It also shows how much more profoundly learned in the Selenian mysteries were the ancients than are now in our modern astronomers. The whole pantheon of the lunar gods and goddesses, Nephthys or Neith, Proserpina, Melita, Cybele, Isis, Astarte, Venus, and Hecate on the one hand, and Apollo, Dionysius, Adonis, Bacchus, Osiris, Ates, Tammuz, etc., etc., on the other, all show on the face of their names and titles, those of sons and husbands of their mothers, their identity with the Christian Trinity. In every religious system, the gods were made to merge their functions as father, son, and husband into one, and the goddesses were identified as wife, mother, and sister of the male god, the former synthesizing the human attributes as the Son, the giver of life, the latter merging all the other titles in the grand synthesis known as Maya, Maya, Maria, etc., a generic name. Maya, in its forced derivation, has come to mean with the Greeks mother, from the root ma, nurse, and even gave its name to the month of May, which was sacred to all those goddesses before it became consecrated to Mary. Footnote. The Roman Catholics are indebted for the idea of consecrating the month of May to the Virgin to the pagan Plutarch, who shows that May is sacred to Maia, or Vesta, our Mother Earth, our nurse and nourisher personified. Its primitive meaning, however, was Maya, Durga, translated by the Orientalist as inaccessible, but meaning in truth the unreachable in the sense of illusion and unreality, as being the source and cause of spells, the personification of illusion. In religious rites, the moon served a dual purpose, personified as a female goddess for exoteric purposes, or as a male god in allegory and symbol. In occult philosophy, our satellite was regarded as a sexless potency to be well studied because it was to be dreaded. With the initiated Aryans, Chaldee, Greeks, and Romans, Soma, Sen, Artemis, Sotiera, the hermaphrodite Apollo, whose attribute is the lyre, and the bearded Diana of the bow and arrow, Deus Lunus, and especially Osiris Lunus and Teote Lunus. Footnote. Teote Lunus is Buddha Soma of India, or Mercury and the Moon, and especially Osiris Lunus and Teote Lunus were the occult potencies of the moon. But whether male or female, whether Teote or Minerva, Soma or Astoreth, the moon is the occult mystery of mysteries, a more a symbol of evil than of good. Her 7 phases, original esoteric division, are divided into 3 astronomical phenomena and 4 purely psychic phases. That the moon was not always reverenced is shown in the mysteries, in which the death of the moon god, the 3 phases of gradual waning and final disappearance, was allegorized by the moon standing for the genius of evil that triumphs for the time over the light and life-giving god, the sun, and all the skill and learning of the ancient hierophants in magic was required to turn this triumph into a defeat. It was the most ancient worship of all, that of the third race of our round, the hermaphrodites, to whom the male moon became sacred, when after the fall, so-called, the sexes had become separated. Deus Lunus then became an androgyne, male and female in turn, to serve, finally, for purposes of sorcery, as a dual power to the fourth root race, the Atlanteans. With the fifth, our own, the lunar solar worship divided the nations into 2 distinct antagonistic camps. It led to events described eon later in the Mahabharatan War, which to the Europeans is the fabulous, to the Hindus and occultists the historical, strife between the Suryavansas and the Indovansas, originating in the dual aspect of the moon, the worship of the female and the male principles, respectively. It ended in distinct solar and lunar cults. Among the Semitic races, the sun was for a very long time feminine, and the moon masculine, the latter notion being adopted by them from the Atlantean traditions. The moon was called the Lord of the Sun, Bel-Shemesh. Footnote. During that period, which is absent from the Mosaic books, from the exile of Eden to the allegorical flood, the Jews worshipped with the rest of the Semites Dionysus, the ruler of men, the judge or the sun. Though the Jewish canon and Christianism have made the sun become Lord God and Jehovah in the Bible, yet the latter is full of indiscreet traces to the androgyne deity, which was Jehovah the sun and Ashtoreth the moon in its female aspect, and quite free from the present metaphorical element given to it. God is a consuming fire, appears in and is encompassed by fire. It was not only in the vision that Ezekiel saw the Jews worshipping the sun. The Baal of the Israelites, the Shemesh of the Moabites, and the Moloch of the Ammonites was the identical Son Jehovah, and he is, till now, the King of the host of heaven. The sun, as much as Ashtoreth, was the Queen of heaven, or the moon. The Son of Righteousness has become a metaphorical expression only now. Bel-Shemesh before the Shemesh worship. The ignorance of the incipient reasons for such a distinction and of occult principles led the nations into anthropomorphic idol worship. But the religion of every ancient nation has been primarily based upon the occult manifestations of a purely abstract force or principle, now called God. The very establishment of such worship shows, in its details and rites, that the philosophers who evolved these systems of nature, subjective and objective, possessed profound knowledge and were acquainted with many facts of a scientific nature. For besides being purely occult, the rites of lunar worship were based, as just shown, upon a knowledge of physiology, quite a modern science with us. Psychology, sacred mathematics, geometry, and metrology, in their right applications to symbols and figures, which are but glyphs, recording observed natural and scientific facts. In short, upon a most minute and profound knowledge of nature, lunar magnetism generates life, preserves, and kills it. Soma embodies the triple power of the Trimurti, though it passes unrecognized by the profane to this day. The allegory that makes Soma, the moon, produced by the churning of the oceans of life, space, by the gods in another Manvantara. An example, in the pre-genetic day of our planetary system, and that other allegory, which shows the rishis milking the earth, whose calf was Soma, the moon, has a deep cosmographical meaning. For it is neither our earth which is milked, nor was the moon, which we know, the calf. Footnote. The earth flees for her life in the allegory before Prithu, who pursues her. She assumes the shape of a cow and, trembling with terror, runs away and hides, even in the regions of Brahma. Therefore it is not our earth. Again, in every Purana the cow changes name. In one it is Manu Swaya Ambhuva, in another Indra, in the third the Himalayas itself, while Maru was the milker. This is a deeper allegory than one thinks. It is indeed, and you'll have to read my book to find out why. Had our wise men of science known as much of the mysteries of nature as the ancient Aryans did, they would surely never have imagined that the moon was projected from the earth. Once more, the oldest of permutations in theogony, the son becoming his own father, and the mother generated by the son, has to be remembered and taken into consideration if the symbolical language of the ancients is to be understood by us. Otherwise, mythology will be ever haunting the Orientalist as simply the disease which springs up at a peculiar stage of human culture, as Renouf gravely observes in a Hibbert lecture. The ancients taught the, so to speak, auto-generation of the gods, the one divine essence, unmanifested, perpetually begetting a second self, manifested, which second self, androgynous in its nature, gives birth, in an immaculate way, to everything macro and microcosmical in this universe. This was shown in the circle and the diameter, or the sacred 10, a few pages back. But our Orientalists, their extreme desire to discover one homogeneous element in nature notwithstanding, will not see it. Cramped in their researches by such ignorance, they, the Arianists and Egyptologists, are constantly led astray from truth in their speculations. Thus, De Rouge is unable to understand, in the text which he translates, the meaning of Amun-Ra saying to King Amenophanes, supposed to be Memnon, "Thou art my son, I have begotten thee," and, as he finds the same idea in many a text under various forms, this very Christian Orientalist is finally compelled to exclaim that, for this idea to have entered the mind of a hierogrammatist, there must have been in their religion a more or less defined doctrine, indicating, as a possible fact that might come to pass, a divine and immaculate incarnation under a human form. Precisely. But why throw the explanation on an impossible prophecy when the whole secret is explained by the latter religion copying the earlier? The doctrine was universal, and it was not the mind of any one hierogrammatist that evolved it. For the Indian avatars are a proof to the contrary, after which, having come to realize clearer, footnote, his clear realization of it is that the Egyptians prophesied Jehovah and his incarnated Redeemer, the good serpent, etc., etc., even to identifying Typhon with the wicked dragon of the Garden of Eden, and this passes as serious and sober science. To realize clearer what the Divine Father and Son were with the Egyptians, De Rouge still fails to account for and perceive what were the functions attributed to the feminine principle in that primordial generation. He does not find it in the goddess Neith of Sais, yet he quotes the sentence of the commander to Cambyses when introducing that king into the Saitic temple. I made known to his majesty the dignity of Sais, which is the abode of Neith, the great female producer, genitrix of the sun, who is the firstborn, and who is not begotten, but only brought forth, and hence is the fruit of an immaculate mother. How much more grandiose, philosophical, and poetical is the real distinction, for whoever is able to understand and appreciate it, made between the Immaculate Virgin of the ancient pagans and the modern papal conception. With the former, the ever-youthful Mother Nature, the antitype of her prototypes, the sun and the moon, generates and brings forth her mind-born son, the universe. The sun and the moon, as male-female deities, fructify the earth, the microcosmical mother, and the latter conceives and brings forth in her turn. With the Christians, the firstborn, primogenitus, is indeed generated, in example, begotten, genitum non factum, and positively conceived and brought forth, virgo periet, explains the Latin Church. Thus, she drags down the noble spiritual ideal of the Virgin Mary to the earth, and making her of the earth earthy, degrades that ideal to the lowest of the anthropomorphic goddesses of the rabble. Truly, Neith, Isis, Diana, etc., etc., were each of them a demiurgical goddess, at once visible and invisible, having her place in heaven and helping to the generation of species. The moon, in short. Her occult aspects and powers are numberless, and in one of them the moon becomes with the Egyptians Hathor, another aspect of Isis. Footnote. Hathor is the infernal Isis, the goddess preeminently of the West, or the netherworld. Another aspect of Isis, and both of these goddesses are shown suckling Horus. Behold, in the Egyptian hall of the British Museum, Hathor, worshipped by Pharaoh Tehotemes, who stands between her and the Lord of Heavens. The monolith was taken from Karnak, and the same goddess has the same following legend inscribed on her throne. The Divine Mother and Lady, or Queen of Heaven, also the Morning Star and the Light of the Sea. It is funny to note, right, if you are unfamiliar with Karnak, Karnak is one of those places that we cannot explain some things, much like the pyramids, and we cannot reproduce that. Karnak has the trilithon, which is 3 enormous stones, which even today we could not move to the location where they are from where they came from. We don't have the technology that would enable that to happen now, but somehow they managed to do it at Karnak, and if that is in relation to this goddess, that makes sense. Stella Montania and Lux Maris. All the lunar goddesses had a dual aspect, one divine, the other infernal. Sorry. All were the virgin mothers of an immaculately born son, the sun. Raoul Rocchetti shows the moon goddess of the Athenians, Pallas or Sibyl, Minerva, or again Diana, holding her child son on the lap, invoked in her festivals as Monogenes Theou, the one mother of God, sitting on the lion and surrounded by 12 personages, in whom the occultist recognizes the 12 great gods, and the pious Christian Orientalist, the apostles, or rather the Grecian pagan prophecy thereof. They are both right, for the Immaculate Goddess of the Latin Church is a faithful copy of the older pagan goddesses. The number 12 of the apostles is that of the 12 tribes, and the latter are a personification of the 12 great gods, and of the 12 signs of the zodiac. There's actually 13 of those, Every detail, almost, in the Christian dogma is borrowed from the heathens. Semele, the wife of Jupiter and the mother of Bacchus, the sun, is, according to Nonnus, also carried, or made to ascend to heaven after her death, where she presides between Mars and Venus under the name of Queen of the World, or the Universe, Pan Basilia, at the names of which, as at the names of Hathor, Hecate, and other infernal goddesses, tremble all the demons. Footnote. This is de Mirville, who proudly confesses the similarity, and he ought to know. Similin primausi diamonis. This Greek inscription on a small temple, reproduced on a stone that was found by somebody, was copied by Montfaucon, and de Mirville tells us 113 Archaeologie de la Vierge Mary informs us of the stupendous fact that the Magna Mater of the Old World was an impudent plagiarism perpetrated by the demon of the Immaculate Virgin Mother of his Church. Whether so or vice versa is of no importance. That which is interesting to note is the perfect identity between the archaic copy and the modern original. Did space permit, we might show the inconceivable coolness and unconcern exhibited by certain followers of the Roman Catholic Church when made to face the revelations of the past. To Maury's remark that the Virgin took possession of all the sanctuaries of Ceres and Venus, and that the pagan rites proclaimed and practiced in honor of these goddesses were, in a good measure, transferred to the Mother of Christ, the Advocate of Rome answers that such is the fact, and that it is just as it should be and quite natural, as the dogma, the liturgy, and the rites professed by the Roman Apostolical Church in 1862 are found engraved on monuments, inscribed on papyri and cylinders hardly posterior to the deluge. It does seem impossible to deny the existence of a first anti-historical Roman Catholicism, of which our own is but the faithful continuation. But while the former was the culmination, the summum, of the impudence of demons and geetic necromancy, the latter is divine. If in our Christian revelation, l'Apocalypse, Mary, clothed with the sun and having the moon under her feet, has nothing more in common with the humble servant of Nazareth, it is because she has now become the greatest of theological and cosmological powers in our universe. That's an interesting way to go for a bunch of people who worship Christ, huh? The Virgin is, indeed, the greatest. That's interesting. Verily so, sends Pindar's hymns to Minerva, who sits at the right hand of her father Jupiter, and who is more powerful than all the other angels or gods, are likewise applied to the Virgin. It is Saint Bernard who, quoted by Cornelius a Lapide, is made to address the Virgin Mary in this wise: "The Son Christ lives in thee, and thou livest in him." Sermon on the Holy Virgin. Again, the Virgin is admitted to be the moon by the same unsophisticated holy man. Being the Lucina of the Church, that is, in childbirth, the verse of Virgil, Casta fove Lucina, tuus jam regnat Apollo, is applied to her. Like the moon, the Virgin is the Queen of Heaven, adds the innocent saint. This settles the question. The more similarity, according to such writers as de Merville, there exists between the pagan conceptions and the Christian dogmas, the more divine appears the Christian religion, and the more it is seen to be the only truly inspired one, especially in its Roman Catholic form. The unbelieving scientists and the academicians who think they see in the Latin Church quite the opposite of divine inspiration, and who will not believe in the satanic tricks of plagiarism by anticipation, are severely taken to task. But then, they believe in nothing and reject even the Nabatean agriculture as a romance and a pack of superstitious nonsense, complains the memorialist. In their perverted opinion, Kutame's idol of the moon and the statue of the Madonna are one. A noble marquis wrote 20 years ago in 6 huge volumes, or, as he calls them, memoirs to the French Academy, with the sole object of showing Roman Catholicism an inspired and revealed faith. As a proof thereof, he furnishes numberless facts, all tending to show that the entire ancient world, ever since the deluge, had been, with the help of the devil, systematically plagiarizing the rites, ceremonies, and dogmas of the future Holy Church to be born ages later. What would the faithful son of Rome have said had he heard his co-religionist, M. Renouf, the distinguished Egyptologist of the British Museum, declaring in one of his learned lectures that neither Hebrews nor Greeks borrowed any of their ideas from Egypt? Footnote. Quoted in Mr. G. Massey's lecture. But perhaps it is just that this M. Renouf intended to say, namely, that it is the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Aryans who borrowed theirs from the Latin Church. And if so, why, in the name of logic, do the papists reject the additional information which the occultists may give them on moon worship, since it all tends to show their, the Roman Catholic, worship as old as the world, of Sabianism and astrology? The reason of the early Christian and later Roman Catholic astrology, or the symbolical worship of sun and moon, identical with that of the Gnostics, though less philosophical and pure than the sun worship of the Zoroastrians, is a natural consequence of its birth and origin. The adoption by the Latin Church of such symbols as the water, fire, sun, moon, and stars, and a good many other things, is simply a continuation by the early Christians of the old worship of pagan nations. Thus, Odin got his wisdom, power, and knowledge by sitting at the feet of Mimir, the thrice-wise Jotun, who passed his life by the fountain of primeval wisdom, the crystalline waters of which increased his knowledge daily. Mimir drew the highest knowledge from the fountain because the world was born of water. Hence, primeval wisdom was to be found in that mysterious element, Asgard and the gods. The eye which Odin had to pledge to acquire the knowledge may be the sun, which enlightens and penetrates all things, his other eye being the moon, whose reflection gazes out of the deep, and which, at last, when setting, sinks into the ocean. But it is something more besides this. Loki, the fire god, is said to have hidden in the water, as well as in the moon, the light-giver, whose reflection he found therein. And this belief, that the fire finds refuge in the water, was not limited to the old Scandinavians. It was shared by all nations and was finally taken up by the early Christians, who symbolized the Holy Ghost under the shape of fire, cloven tongues like as fire, the breath of the Father's Son. This fire descends also into the water or the sea. Mar, Mary. The dove was the symbol of the soul with several nations. It was sacred to Venus, the goddess born from the sea foam, and it became later the symbol of the Christian anima mundi, or the Holy Spirit. One of the most occult chapters in the Book of the Dead is chapters 20, 30, 40, 50, entitled, "To make the transformation into the God giving light to the path of darkness, wherein woman light of the shadow serves Teote in his retreat in the moon. Teote Hermes is said to hide therein because he is the representative of the secret wisdom. He is the manifested logos of his light side, the concealed deity or dark wisdom, when he is supposed to retire to the opposite hemisphere. Speaking of her power, the moon calls herself repeatedly the light which shineth in darkness, the woman light. Hence, it became the accepted symbol of all the Virgin Mother goddesses. As the wicked, evil spirits warred against the moon in days of yore, so they are supposed to war now, without being able to prevail, however, against the actual Queen of Heaven, Mary, the moon. Hence, also, the moon was intimately connected in all the pagan theogonies with the dragon, her eternal enemy, the Virgin, or Madonna, standing on the mythical Satan under that form, crushed and made powerless under her feet. This, because the head and tail of the dragon, which represent in Eastern astronomy to this day the ascending and descending nodes of the moon, were also symbolized in ancient Greece by the two serpents. Hercules kills them on the day of his birth, and so does the babe in his virgin mother's arms, as Mr. Gerald Massey aptly observes in this connection. All such symbols figured on their own facts from the first, and did not prefigure others of a totally different order. The iconography, and dogmas too, had survived in Rome from a period remotely pre-Christian. There was neither forgery nor interpolation of types, nothing but a continuity of imagery with a perversion of its meaning. And that is going to bring us to the end of the study of the moon. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult topic. I understand that I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes whenever I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I did not have a whole lot to add to this, right? If you are worshiping the moon, you're doing it wrong. If you're using the moon to keep track of things, you're doing it right. If you're worshiping the sun, you are doing it wrong. If you're using the sun to keep track of things, you are doing it right. And so, as an allegory, it works. It's perfectly fine. As an actual representative of something to worship, no. If you do, you are doing it wrong. As I stated in the beginning, the deity, God, to me, is the Holy Spirit. It is literally everything all at the same time. And if you are looking for any object to worship, you're doing it wrong. God is beyond all of the objects, and we do not even know that we are the perfection, right? And so to worship any man is going to be wrong every single time. To worship any woman, going to be wrong every single time. To worship a child, to worship a sun, to worship the moon, to worship a star, to worship a stick, to worship anything that you can put your eyes upon, you're doing it wrong. Now, you can look at nature and be astounded by the glory that is God. That is true. But even everything that you see, while it is God, is not the entirety of God. There are things that you are not seeing. So if you worship any particular piece of that, you are missing the greater portion of that. That is the part to remember. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, share, and a sub. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated here. If it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss in the manner that we are doing, drop that in the comments as well. And if you really like what I'm doing, hit me with that super thanks. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete, just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.